right, here we go. Well, I'm glad you got a slot.
Yes, me too. I just happened to check the calendar and I saw there was an opening. I said, oh, I jumped right on it and here we go.
That's the way it usually works. Well, you and I have conversed a little bit, and you've got a YouTube channel where you play some music, but why don't we begin with, well, tell me a little bit about yourself and your story.
Sure. So I'm a millennial. I was born in 1984, and father is a Mason, and my mother had various jobs, mostly in the medical field, and moved around a lot as a kid. I think some of that had to do with just financial situation. And actually, I want to give a little disclaimer in the beginning, and that some of the background that I'm going to give is initially going to seem to paint a sort of negative light on my parents, but I'm going to do a spoiler alert and say they're in a different place now than they were in my childhood. So,
okay.
So
it's helpful to give people a chance to change.
Yes. So, and I was blind to a lot of the stuff as a child, so that was good too.
Yeah.
But so I moved around a lot as a child, which made it very hard to make friends. And I was bullied a lot. I was very skinny, shy, introverted, and so that led to a point where once I got into my teens, got into middle school, I had developed quite an anger problem. And so when things started happening, like school shootings and stuff like that, started to at least hit the media a lot more. Looking back on my childhood now, I can see, like, if certain things hadn't happened, I had a lot of really negative thoughts in my mind as a teen, particularly, that if certain events hadn't happened, the trajectory was bad. And thankfully, I met this girl who invited me to youth group. And so I went to the youth group with her, mostly because I was interested in her, not interested in going to church or anything like that. I barely had any relationship with church or God as a child. I think in my early childhood, probably went to like a Baptist church, something like that. I do vaguely remember going to church, but I don't, remember much. So anyways, I go to this youth group, and I'm 16 years old at the time. And, it's like very laid back. And my only idea of church was maybe if I had been to a wedding or a funeral, and mostly a sort of Catholic situation and at those events. And so the freeness of it was interesting to me. I thought, okay. And then I ended up going to a Sunday service after the youth group, and people are raising their hands and singing and jumping around and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is different. This is okay. Everybody's like standing up during worship and singing along, and their hands are raised. Like I said, I'm like, all right, I'll give this a shot, I guess. But again, I'm still just interested in this girl who is now today my wife. So yes. So I'm like, all right, whatever it takes to keep this relationship going, sure. And then still 16 years old, later that same summer, we had officially started dating throughout the course of the beginning of the summer. I ended up going to some sort of retreat thing or something. I don't even remember what it's called. I remember the main speaker, I think his name was Luis Palau, something like that.
Yeah.
And there was an altar call, and I don't remember anything specifically that was said, but I just remember a sort of inability to not go forward at the altar call.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I went there, the guy's praying. Again, I don't even remember the prayer that's being prayed, but I just remember a tremendous weight just lifted. And all of a sudden, I feel like all jittery and stuff. I started laughing. I'm like, I don't know what's happening to me right now, but I guess this is a good thing. So, so that was my, I guess you would call it a salvation experience. And from, I remember hearing from other people, you know, that they can remember specific things that changed upon their salvation. You know, I immediately stopped smoking. I immediately that. I was healed of this, and this. And at the moment, I didn't. All I knew was, you know, it felt weird. I felt tremendously light. But it wasn't until probably months later that I realized most of my childhood leading up to that time, I had a fear of going to sleep at night. I was terrified of going to sleep. So part of that was because I would have insane night terrors. So, for instance, I remember as a young child having a nightmare that had like Freddy Krueger in it, right? And so in the nightmare, I wake up and I go to wake up my parents. My parents turn over in their bed and they are monsters. Then I wake up from that and I go to them, and there's all these like crab monsters on my floor in between me and getting to my parents. So I would have these night terrors within night terrors. So that was one reason I was terrified to sleep at night. Another reason was that, and this would play a role in how I think about things even to this day. I used to have these really esoteric thoughts, and of course I don't know them as esoteric thoughts when I'm a child, but
Right.
I would have these thoughts like, what if I wake up and this whole time I've been dreaming, right? So kind of like a Descartes kind of thing, like how do you know the difference? How do you know you're not really dreaming right now, right? So I would have those kind of thoughts, you know, really young, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, you know, it's like, okay. So that would have me afraid to sleep at night because like, what if I wake up and my parents don't really exist, you know, weird stuff. So, but I realized that after my salvation experience, I loved going to sleep at night, right? I had this peace. So I would get in bed at night, I'd be all comfortable and sleep. And then I wouldn't like getting up in the morning because I'd be so comfortable in bed, you know? So, yeah, that was one thing.
That's amazing. That's really wild.
Yeah. And then the other main difference after my salvation experience was the anger problem that I had just snowballing over time, significantly dissipated. So I still to this day have a short fuse at times, but it's nothing like, you know, if someone cuts me off on the road, I might want to flip them off. It's not like when I was in high school and if someone bullied me or tripped me in the hallway, I'm thinking really bad things I'd like to do to this person. So yes, I still have a little bit of a short fuse, but the main thing was just peace. I had tremendous peace from that moment forward. And so then just to give you a little bit more of my biography from kind of the salvation experience forward, I had no plans of going to college, right? As a kid. I was terrible in school, and I picked up playing guitar when I was maybe 14, maybe a little bit younger. My dad was in a Southern rock tribute band, so he would play like Lynyrd Skynyrd songs and ZZ Top and all that stuff, right? So he started to teach me how to play guitar, and so I thought, okay, clearly I won't be able to make a living playing guitar, but my dad's a mason. I can learn masonry from him, even though he tells me all the time, you don't want to do this for a living, blah, blah, blah. You know? They thought, you know what, you know, it is what it is. I'm terrible at school and there's no way I'm going to college. But of course, having this girlfriend now and meeting her parents who, I forgot to mention, her parents were the youth group leaders at the time. Yeah, yep. So they're both tremendous parent figures to me to this day. At the time, her dad, my father-in-law, he was the first person who made me realize that I have an intellectual side.
Hmm.
So when he was the one who would primarily lead the youth group, and he would give most of the lessons. And the way that he would present the material was he had like a very kind of Socratic method to how he would do things. You know, so he would present some bit of lecturing, so to speak, and then it was a lot of questioning and answering, which I hadn't really experienced because they don't really do that kind of stuff in middle school and high school, and at least around where I'm from. So, and this is all upstate New York. Like most of my life is just upstate New York. So anyways, youth group leader is my girlfriend's father. He's teaching in this very Socratic way. He's fostering a lot of questioning. And I start asking some questions just around, I can't even remember anything specific, right? But there were a couple of times where he would say something like, "That's a really interesting question. You should look into that. Like, here's some scriptures that you can look at." And, it was like maybe partly tactical on his part of like, I don't really have an answer for that. But I can at least guide him in the right way. Or maybe he even had an answer in his mind, but he's very honest when he has an intuition about something, but doesn't necessarily know it, and again, that was something I hadn't really been exposed to. So that kind of sowed a little seed of like, maybe I like to think about things and research things. And all right, and he's also an electronic engineer, right? So he's an extremely intelligent person. And again, I come from a blue collar background. So my girlfriend's white collar home was a very, very new experience. A Christian white collar home. It was like, again, my dad, Mason, every other word is the F word growing up, right? So all my, any of the few friends that I had loved my dad because he just said whatever, and just like, your dad's the coolest dad, But so anyway, so then I go over to my girlfriend's house. I get to know her parents, and they never swear. They don't listen to rough rock music really. My girlfriend did, but they don't. It's just like, I don't know how to even talk to these people. I have no idea what to do. And I'm also thinking, oh great, now I can't just be a Mason, and I can't just play guitar and hope for a big breakthrough. I'm interested enough in this girl that I was always the kind of person who, once I developed a relationship with someone, it was like full on, you are a very good friend of mine, right? And so when it was a girlfriend, it was like, okay, so this is the person I'm going to marry. And sure enough, she was. But so it's not that I ever got the impression from them that being a Mason wouldn't be enough. But for me, I was like, okay, I want to eventually own a home and be comfortable enough financially to be able to do things like go on vacations, which was unheard of for me as a child, basically, unless my grandma took me or something,
Yeah.
So I saw everything that my girlfriend lived in, and I was like, well, I want to at least be able to do that.
Sure.
So then I'm like, well, what am I even interested in? I don't know. I liked the movie Silence of the Lambs, and I thought that Clarice, she's the criminal profiler. I was like, that's fascinating. I would like to study that.
Yeah.
The irony not apparent to me at the time that with all of the anger that I had in my childhood and the tendencies that I was progressing towards were maybe pretty close to someone that I would eventually, if I were to become a criminal profiler, would have been investigating. Right? So, but I ended up, okay, I did terrible. I'm doing terrible in high school. There's no way I'm going to get into a nice college.
Right.
I'm going to pursue criminal justice. So I'm in New York. Let me look at some of the SUNY colleges. Those are the state colleges.
Yep.
And I find out that SUNY Albany is highly rated, even in the country in general, for criminal justice. So I applied there. Or sorry, rewind. I saw that SUNY Albany was highly rated. I'm like, well, I need some kind of stepping stone, right, to kind of get in that direction. So I went to local community college, Dutchess Community College specifically. So I go to my local community college for criminal justice. In my first semester, I got president's list, right? So I got like a 3.9 something GPA. I was terrible in school. I mean, I probably a lot of my teachers just pushed me through. Like I mean, I got C's, and I don't know how I got them, but I did. So, but then I get to college, and it's just, it's more of the approach like my father-in-law, right, took during youth group when he was teaching us. It was like, here's the base material, here's the kind of outline, and these are the things we need you to fill in the blanks here. We need you to go present what you find here, present what your thoughts are.
Yep.
And I loved it. I mean, I had to take a public speaking course in my first semester, and that was terrifying for me. I still have the jitters, like even before this meeting. I have a little bit of jitters, but I guess that's just normal for just about any human, I guess. But so throughout going to Dutchess Community College for criminal justice, that really just reinforced the idea that there is this intellectual side of me. There is this side of me that not only likes to think about things and research things, but enjoys formulating my own thoughts and opinions and views on things and then presenting them. And so by the time I was done with my associate's degree at Dutchess Community College, I decided at the time that what I really wanted to pursue was criminology, which is theories of essentially why people commit crime, right? So not why like an individual person has decided to commit a crime, but like, why does crime come about in the first place, right? So it's this very, it's a very kind of abstract course of study.
It's a theory behind crime.
Exactly. So, of course, as I'm realizing that, I also, kind of look around and see what kind of jobs there possibly are, and there's just none. Like, there's no such thing unless you're going to be a professor who's teaching this stuff, who is researching on the side and writing papers. So I'm like, okay, so I guess I'm going to have to become a professor, which is weird because I've always hated speaking publicly, but I've grown to appreciate it. And so I transfer up to SUNY Albany. I'm now pursuing my bachelor's degree. It's actually, I got into a combined bachelor's master's accelerated program. So going through there, once I start taking graduate courses in criminology, then I'm like, yeah, like this is definitely, like I love doing this, right? Because it's very small classes. There's 6 to 10 students in a class max, and it was like every class was like a round table. We just sit there. Okay, what are your thoughts? What have you? What's your theory, so to speak, on this particular thing? So, and I would always. I'd be very slow to participate in class, but only because originally when I was younger, I'd be slow to participate because I was afraid to speak. But over time, as I progressed in the criminal justice courses into grad level courses, it was more like there were very specific things that I was interested in enough to have something that I felt was worth saying. And so I would participate maybe like once every few weeks in a class. And in this one particular course, now this is 2000, this is somewhere between like, this is probably around 2008 at this time. So I'm getting close to finishing up my master's, going to start preparing to apply for a PhD program, to get into the PhD program. So I'm in this one grad level course, and some question was asked. I don't even remember what the specific question was. And somebody answered the question. And then I just had a question for their answer. the students' answer. And the professor said, you see, he hardly ever participates, but when he does, it actually means something. And like, and I was sitting there, I was like, oh, so that feels kind of nice. You know?
Sure.
I feel like that, you know, whatever. And because it's, I don't want to necessarily get political, which might sound funny since I'm in the whole Jordan Peterson universe right now, but it was very apparent during my education, particularly in the graduate program, that the fellow students were primarily left-leaning, right?
Yeah.
And so my default became like devil's advocate kind of thing. So if someone presented something, even if I was like, okay, I can see why they would say that, and I probably agree.
Yeah.
But what about like this, like, you know, poke, you know, like, and so the professors that I had would like really appreciate that, you know.
Yep.
And so, anyways, right. So that kind of stuff happened a lot, and I'm like, by the time I'm ready to apply for my PhD, I'm just like convinced, yes, like this is what I want to do, you know. And if I can be a professor where I'm able to just, that's my job, to present things to people and kind of make them question and blah blah blah, and that'd be fantastic. As well as develop my own theories and have people try to poke holes in those so that I can grow from that. And I don't get into the PhD program. Now, I only applied for the one PhD program, which I was told by everybody not to do that, right? Like apply all over the place.
Yeah.
Now, granted, so I'm applying late 2008, early 2009, peak recession. The PhD programs, any of them that I would have applied to, but definitely the one I did apply to, fully funded plus $20,000 stipend, right? So they went from accepting anywhere from like 8 to 10 new PhD students a year to that particular cohort was 3 students.
Wow.
So, you know, part of me not getting in the PhD program was on me. I scored relatively low on the quantitative portion of the graduate record exam, but I had lots of references from people in the department and everything, but it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I was sitting there and didn't get the PhD. I got the letter. I was home, got the letter in the mail that I didn't get in the PhD program. This was also the night of one of my close friends' weddings. So I was like, well, 5-hour open bar, here I come. I didn't get in the PhD program. I was like dead sure, like this is what I'm gonna do.
Wow.
I was kind of like almost given the impression that it was a shoo-in from my committee, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was deflated, and I go to the wedding, and I'm seated next to this guy who is a friend of one of my friends. And again, this is late 2008, early 2009, and so Obama had just gotten elected, right?
Yep.
And I had been disgusted by the Super Bowl-ness of politics.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? So it was like, I remember I never tuned into politics in my life.
Yeah.
And then there were all the conventions were happening, and I would tune in to watch them. And I'm like, it looks like I'm watching the Super Bowl. Like, this is
entertainment.
This is supposed to be about the future of the country. Like, it's supposed to, I don't know, like, it seemed like there should have been something more like I don't know, solemn is not the right word, but
serious. Yeah,
something, exactly. And so I had been disgusted about it, and somehow after a couple of drinks, I'm talking to this guy who I didn't really know, who was one of my friend's friends, and he was equally disgusted. We get talking about stuff. Turns out he's very socialist leaning.
Okay.
And so we're talking. I said, I don't really know anything about politics. I just know that was whatever I was watching was disgusting. And then I'm telling them like my thoughts. I'm like, I don't think the government should be involved in this and this. I'm just spewing stuff out, not even knowing like what party I'd be interested in and all this stuff. He's like, I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I think you're a libertarian. I was like, all right, cool, whatever. So I start researching libertarianism. I'm like, yep, okay, that's what I am. Sounds good. And so that moment, that drunken moment, becomes probably one of the pivotal moments of me being actually on this channel. Besides so salvation, that was obviously a big part of why I'm here.
Yeah.
But then Libertarian Moment, that also turns out played a role in me being interested in your channel eventually, right? So if at any moment you want to stop me or anything, I know I'm rambling.
I'm still waiting to see where this goes. Keep going.
Okay.
You're doing fine.
All right, good. All right, so he says, sounds like you're a libertarian. I research it. Yep, turns out I'm a libertarian. So let me see here. In the midst of researching stuff like libertarianism, I think I ended up coming across like Henry David Thoreau. So I'm reading some of his stuff. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like pretty good. So particularly his Duty of Civil Disobedience. That was like one of the first non-required readings of mine that I like stumbled across myself, where I was like, this is good stuff. That somehow researching Henry David Thoreau or someone related to him took me into looking into existentialism a little bit. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm a Christian. I wonder if there's such a thing as Christian existentialism. I don't know, maybe. So Google, and before I know it, Dostoevsky comes up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is good stuff. This is good. And then because I'm researching Dostoevsky, I find Tolstoy, and then I'm reading Tolstoy, and then I find out that he's got these nonfiction spiritual writings. So then I'm reading his stuff. I'm like, okay, I don't agree with this, and this, but his view on the Sermon on the Mount and stuff is like, it hurts, but it's spot on. That's really good. So from discussion with now one of my closest friends, who's politically diametrically opposed to me, I find my home, politically speaking, which brings me to my home, so to speak, philosophically speaking, with not necessarily existentialism, but the kind of peripherals of existentialism and Christian existential thought. Well, that's kind of an odd label, but I get really excited because one of the things that I started experiencing negatively internally while I was at church is that, okay, I'm enjoying this time at church. In case I didn't mention and didn't make it clear, the church I went to is, it's very like evangelical Pentecostal kind of thing, right?
Yep.
So
they had a youth group, so that's an indication.
Yeah. So I enjoyed church for what it was, but there was always, and this is true for most of my life anyways, even in my childhood, I always felt there was a significant part of me that didn't quite fit, right? So for instance, a lot of people seem to find it natural to raise their hands and to sing along and all that kind of stuff. And my default has always been, whenever I'd see that in the environment around me, was not like, what's wrong with these people around me? It was, what's wrong with me that I can't get there? Like, what am I, why am I feeling this block in between? And talking to my father-in-law and a couple other people in church, some of my friends that I developed in church, who felt a similar kind of way, but seeing that they stayed loyal to the church, they still benefited from going to church, gave me kind of a peace that, like, okay, so it's okay for me to feel a bit different being there, right? To feel a resistance to raising my hands. It wasn't like a rebellious, like, I'm not raising my hands. It was just like, okay. And I mean, and then sometimes I would, I'd just stand there and just between the music and everything like that, I would naturally, raise my hands, and I'm in it and I'm there, but I wanted to be something to chew on more, right? Like, so I was chewing on all this deep stuff for criminal justice, and then on my own with this philosophy stuff, and I'm like, if I'm doing it for that stuff, I want to be able to, like, get into the meat of Christianity. Like, I want to, Jesus died on the cross for me. I've experienced that, like, knowing that deeply. And so if I'm feeling compelled to research this other stuff deeply, I want to dig into him more deeply. And so I was really excited to see that other people, had felt the same way, and they had dug into stuff. Now, early on, I'm just seeing this stuff from stuff that's written in the 1800s, basically. So, like, okay. Then all of a sudden, I guess I'll backfill in a moment, but eventually, I come to find Jordan Peterson, and initially it's just kind of like the libertarian part of me that sees him, like, kind of pushing up against the Bill C-16 thing, and I'm like, yeah, like, that's kind of scary stuff. Like, yeah, they're not shoving down your throats. You have to say these pronouns in a way that people claim that Jordan Peterson is claiming, which he's not, but he's highlighting that, like, this is a symptom of something that's festering. Watch out, right? So, like, I'm like, yeah, that's, I can jump on board with that. And then I discover that he's got this biblical series, and I'm watching it, and the first time that he said something like, I'm going to give technical psychological explanations for what is being laid out in the Bible, but I don't for a second want to give the impression that that's the only layer of truth there. When he said that, I got, like, I was like, I'm going to check this guy out, because he's clearly intellectual. He's clearly grounded. He's got the chops in the secular stuff, or, the professional literature and whatnot. But he's also open to the idea that there's more underneath. And so that got me excited that, like, he was hinting at the fact of there being potential, at least in my mind when I'm watching this, like, he's privy to the fact that could very well be a legitimate metaphysical layer that's just as relevant, if not more real, than the stuff that he's explaining. So I was like, okay, I think this is stuff I'm going to finally be able to chew on. And then eventually that leads me to finding your channel, and just through the YouTube algorithm and whatnot, And then I find out you got this Discord group, and I'm just like, all right. Like, it's just like this, like, crazy ecosystem of points of view that are totally worth, like, bouncing ideas off of.
Yeah, that's what they love.
So, yeah.
Well, I gotta go back now. You didn't get into the PhD program. You're clearly alive.
Yes.
What happened career-wise? When did you marry the girl? I mean, got to get these points.
Yes, I do. So, And I even wrote the stuff down. I'm like, gotta make sure I don't skip this. And then I'm like, I did it. So yeah, so I didn't get in the PhD program. And from there, still dating, obviously, still dating that girl. And her name's Sarah. That's just going to be so much easier than me saying that girl. So I'm still dating Sarah.
Well, I just talked to Ivan, who's on the Discord, and he married a Sarah. So I've only got one name to remember for two guys right now. So that's good. I'll remember that. Another Sarah.
Yeah. So
with an H or no H?
With an H.
With an H. Okay. I didn't ask Ivan. I don't know if his has an H or not. So anyway, on we go.
Yes. So, all right. So don't get in the PhD program. So I guess I got to start applying for jobs.
Yeah.
So for the next 2 years, I think it was until really 2000. Oh no, it was until like late 2010. I worked, I don't know how many part-time temp jobs, just layered on top of each other. Pizza delivery guy, insurance fraud investigator, which was one of the most miserable jobs. The only insurance fraud that I ever caught on tape was an old lady doing her laundry. I was like, I don't want to do this job anymore. So sorry, old lady. Yeah. I worked at Home Depot for a little bit, a bunch of just little jobs. Yeah. And I eventually get a job at this place this organization called YAP, which is Youth Advocate Program. Oh. It was a one-on-one with troubled youth, maybe they had a criminal background, and did that for probably about a year. And while I was doing that, I got a full-time job at a place called Devereaux, which is a residential home for youth with developmental disabilities. Now that job, wait, I'll be in big trouble. She's gonna watch this, so I won't be in trouble. In 2010, June 5th, I get married.
Hey!
Yes, to my high school sweetheart. Right?
Yay!
And, yes. And my socialist friend, I call him a socialist friend lovingly. He's much more than socialist, of course. Yeah. My socialist friend Barry, he was in my wedding. He was part of my wedding.
I love this. This is a great story.
Yes. So we got married June 5th, 2010. And it was a great day. And so I'm really I really need to get a full-time job.
Now you got to start making some money. You can't just keep working at Home Depot. You got to.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that's when I ended up working at Devereaux full-time. Got some relatively decent benefits. Pay is okay, good enough for rent at the apartment, which is good enough for us at the time. We don't have kids yet. Yep. Cool. So, doing that for a while, it was so counter to my personality. Very, very, very hard job working with kids with disabilities. Yeah. Very respectable. Yeah. But I'm, again, despite what some people who know me think, I am a very introverted, shy person, and being in a house full of kids running all over the place, some of which are pooping all over the place and whatnot. Yeah. It was a new experience. It was a stretching experience. I learned that I could handle more than I thought I could. Okay. But I also ultimately, we'll get there shortly, also learned that I do have limits that will break whether I recognize they break or not. So working that for a while, I'm like, this isn't enough. I get a job at a local, at a youth detention facility. And that's a state-run facility. Benefits are magnificent. They're great benefits. Pay is slightly better, but the corruption was insidious. It was pretty bad. So, I'll be tactful in not mentioning things, but
it's fine.
I mean, it wasn't
Anybody
like
who's been around that kind of thing has an idea of what you're talking about.
Yep. So, but again, I'm like, I need to do this. We like, we want to have children. I want to eventually own a house, all stuff. So, and we end up between those two full-time jobs. So I was working 80 hours a week.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yes, you can see where this is going. So, to make matters worse, even though this was, the reason for kind of doing this stuff, we ended up buying a house. And so now it's like, we're in the house and I'm like, it hits me. Now you can't leave those jobs. Like, now you're there. Right. Like that's the impression. That's like the voice.
Yeah.
That's like on me. Like,
yeah.
Now you're stuck there.
Yeah.
And because of the way certain things are in operation there, you're probably not going to make much more money than you're making in either of your roles.
Yeah.
And so have fun working 80 hours a week until
for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Pay for that darn house that you're actually never in because you're working 80 hours a week.
Yeah. And we have our first child, right? So then we have our first child. So I miss the first year of my first child's life, essentially. And not only that, but I begin to become spiritually compromised. So, and it does not, my wife is an extremely resilient person, and she's an extremely honest person, and she's a strong person. And her parents, and I'm going to have to fill in a little bit about my parents too shortly before we run out of time. I end up being blessed with the opportunity to do a career change. So essentially, situation is, okay, like something worse is going to happen to you than losing your job if you don't change your career. So we end up moving back into an apartment. I change careers. I go back to school for computer science. So within, thankfully, I'm able to slide right into a master's degree program in computer science because of my prior course loads that I've already taken previously. And I end up, kind of bulldozing through that in a year, and start teaching computer science at a local community college, and then get a job as a software developer, which I'm working at now. And well, thank God, because now I can work from home remotely with the coronavirus. But so I want to make sure, I do want to backfill a little bit with my parents, just briefly, really quick before it ends. So my some point while I'm going to school for criminal justice, my dad had been a recovering alcoholic, right? At some point, he comes out and says, I fell off the wagon, right? And not only did I fall off the wagon, but, in addition, I've also been doing X, Y, Z, right? Now, my dad, before I got salvation experience, my dad was my picture of God, right? He was, anybody I got into fights with kids because they said something about my dad, right? Because I love my dad.
Yep.
Now that moment, I'd already been saved by the time this happened, and something like broke. Right? This was like in the middle of me getting my master's in criminal justice. Something in me broke that was like, anybody is capable of anything. Right? So like, and that goes. The undertone was like anything bad, right? So like, no matter how much you think you know somebody, they're capable of doing something terrible. Which, I could even riff on like Ravi Zacharias stuff on that, sure. But
in certain areas of pastoral ministry, criminology. You learn this about people because
Right.
disclosures are made, and it's like, oh, okay, this is part
Yeah.
of the human condition. Yep.
Yeah. So, but not too long after that, my dad starts going to the same church that I'm going to, because remember, I got saved because I'm going to this church with my girlfriend.
Right.
My dad's like, at the time, my dad's like, oh, you don't got to worry about me. God will deal with me in His own way. Blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah, He will.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So he ends up with this salvation experience that,
Wow.
could be a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But which probably rightfully his to have. But
Yep.
he is now. I mean, it's a miracle.
Wow.
It's the only way to say it. Right? So he's the worship leader now at the church.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's amazing. So it's important for me to mention that, and also important for me to mention that in 2018, on my wife and I's wedding anniversary, right, June 5th, 2018, we're on vacation. We get a call from my dad. Your sister, brother-in-law, and his nephew just died in a car accident.
Oh.
Now, I had wondered, right, up until that kind of moment, when I would hear of things like that happening, I would wonder if that happened to me, like, how would that impact my spirituality?
Yeah.
And it was like it was almost like involuntarily, my feet just got grounded like in the sand. It was like, you're not going to move me. And my immediate internal response was like, I was very worried about my parents, especially my mom. And then they had my sister and brother-in-law have a son, right? So, and he at the time was 14. So now he's got no parents. And so I wasn't consciously thinking this, but looking back on it, it was like I got to be that person that, like Jordan Peterson says, you want to be the kind of person who at the funeral people can lay their head on your shoulder and you can be the strong person to support. And I mean, I just jumped into that. I just slid right into that role. It wasn't conscious. It was just like, I need to help these people. I need to just be there. And not that I didn't break down, because I certainly,
Of course.
And people around me had their own ways of spiritually kind of articulating what their spiritual mode of dealing with that was, like, different ways of saying God's ways are mysterious, different ways of saying.
People will talk. They gotta kind of work their stuff through. Yep.
And I was like, I can't take that from anybody. Like, even though that does, for me to think that is spiritually dishonest to myself.
Yeah.
Because my way was just, it rains on the just and the unjust.
Yeah.
And sometimes bad things happen to everyone.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that they deserved it. It doesn't mean that they didn't deserve it. It doesn't mean that all it means is they are gone.
Yeah.
And I got tremendous peace because I knew I got up to speak at the funeral. And the moment I got up to speak at the funeral, I knew at that moment, just as sure as I was of my salvation, I thought two things. I thought to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And I thought the Lord is within me. And so in a very real, not hokey at all way, they are also with me.
Yeah.
Like my sister. So not in like she's trapped inside my body and she's not enjoying, it was very much like, okay, this, therefore that. to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. They are absent from the body, present with the Lord. My sister was saved, and I know that I have Jesus in me, and I know that I am walking in some manner. I'm walking in oneness with God in some way, even though I screw that up every day. I know that in that sense, she is with me. So, not that that's any more important than obviously than Jesus being with me. Like he's obviously the primary. But anyways, I wanted to mention those few things because there were certain significant events in my life that occurred after my salvation that I thought, like, I would think looking back on them, like that could have been it. Like I could have just jumped ship, and through no like strength of my own, I think thankfully because of the way that I kind of have always in my life, I've almost always been sort of like a third person, experienced my life in the third person. So I've always been a sort of like detached in a sense. And so I can both experience in the first person the pain, but then simultaneously third person, you kind of be like, I can look coolly at something at the same time, you know? So, and I don't know.
Wow.
that kind of was all over the place.
No, that was great. That was great. That was very helpful. That was very helpful. That was very good. Thank you for sharing your story like that. It's a good story. There's a lot of, it's a good story, and it's not done, of course, but it's well told. And
okay, my mom, if my mom ends up watching this, if you end up posting it, my mom ends up watching this. She prayed for me my whole life. So my mom did have a religious upbringing. XYZ happened to where I didn't necessarily have a religious upbringing, but she always prayed for me. She would yell at me if I used the Lord's name in vain, even though I wasn't going to church or anything. I'm just like, okay, I won't say Jesus in a bad way or anything. So I was like, oh, gotta make sure I mention that. She'll be like, why didn't you just, I don't think she would say that, but anyways.
Well, that was wonderful. So you've indulged me, and I don't have someone right at noon. So if we need a little extra time, that's fine. Anything else you wanted to talk about, or questions you want to ask, or I just really appreciate your story. It's, you know, and I just got finished talking to Ivan, who's also on the Discord server, and he told me his story, and I just, you know, I'm gratified and encouraged, and I just feel just honored to hear your story, and to it's just good to hear. It's good to hear.
Oh, good. Thank you. I mean, if we got a little more time, I do want to say, to get into politics a little bit at a very
why do you like politics? Talk to me about politics.
Well, see, that's actually kind of, so the fact that what I view as one of my closest friendships is with someone who is politically diametrically opposed to me, basically. Even though when we would get into arguments on Facebook, discussions on Facebook, and we eventually got to the point where we were like, I think it was my idea. I was like, we should write each other letters, right? We shouldn't do this. We should actually sit down, take out pieces of paper, and we should write each other letters. I was like, what's your address? So we did that for a little while.
You met him at this wedding.
Yeah, met him at the
wedding. And that started this friend. Maybe then Facebook came along, so you're friends on Facebook, and then the conversations on Facebook about politics.
Yep, exactly. And so it really bothers me the extent to which superficial differences are causing intense, real physical damage. And so I watched one of today's videos that you posted. Actually, I think you posted it today, and I commented on it, and I think I mentioned something to this effect. But the way I operate is, if I get fascinated with an idea, I just kind of go with it, and sometimes I'll even like send the idea to my father-in-law, because I'm like, I've been hooked on this idea for a while, and I may be like going off the rails. I need you to smack me into place if I'm like becoming too obsessive or getting way off course here. Because I've also seen, since my salvation experience, I've seen people get kind of spiritually obliterated, and I don't ever want that to happen to me. So I'm very careful. I surround myself with buffers. I'm just like, what do you? Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm thinking. And I have some very honest friends and family who always give me good feedback. Thankfully, nobody's yelled at me too bad. But anyways, so I'll follow these trains of thought for quite a while. I'll get obsessive over political ideas and philosophical ideas, and I think the reason why I get obsessed over those things is because I've always kind of had this third person experience in the world, and it's me kind of trying to come to terms with like making sense of this strange world around me. And always I'll follow those to such an extent that I'll start blogging about it for like months at a time, and then I get deeper and deeper and deeper, and the deeper I go, the less satisfying it is. And then it always comes back, like I'm thinking that I'm getting closer and closer to solving a problem, to coming up with some convincing way of articulating something that will make a difference in the world around me. And it always gets colder and colder, like the further I go with that. And then every time I come back to, well, the world doesn't need you setting them right. The world just needs to get reacquainted with Jesus. Like, they need to get reconciled. They need to accept the reconciliation that's being offered to them. And you articulating things, no matter how logical you are, no matter how fancy your reasoning is, whatever, no matter how much research you do or how fancy you think you're being and how you're describing these things, nothing is going to compare to Jesus touching their heart. And so I keep, that's been my sort of, I keep coming back to that, no matter how much and without fail too, though, I jump right back into philosophing about things and theorizing about things. And I start writing again. I'm like, all right, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, gosh, doesn't, there's value in that for myself. And as long as I keep that in mind, that like, this is okay, this is helping you sort of deal with the world around you. But when it comes to what you can do for the world around you, just forward the love that Jesus has given you. And so, and that's ultimately what led me to even creating the YouTube channel that I created with the music on it, because my whole, like, most of the time that I've played guitar and played music, I've wanted to come up with, this, like, I don't know, very sort of like avant-garde kind of stuff, and mostly instrumental stuff. And I'll go on, layer on some like electronic instruments, and it's fun to do that, But I realized over time that in the seasons where I felt like spiritually dry, it was me sitting down with my guitar and sort of like just pulling out psalms and singing out just spiritual truths that made me feel reconnected with God. And I felt that peace come back. I felt any anxiety dissipate. And so with the lockdowns and everything, that just, now I'm working from home and I can just, I'm stuck on this. I can't figure out how to fix this bug. I need to step away for a moment to grab the guitar. I'm sitting there, and then, all of a sudden, I hesitate to call them songs because they're very, they're just like, I don't necessarily want to call it a mantra either, but it's like, it's a snippet of like a spiritual truth to meditate on, to get me in a better place in my relationship with God for the moment. So I noticed that this is very beneficial to me. And then over the last month or so, or about a month ago or so, I should say, I started feeling like, this is beneficial for me. Maybe other people it will be beneficial for them. So I started to record things, and I started setting up, all my recording stuff. And I'm like, I want it to be as close to my experience as possible. So, let me just my acoustic guitar, just me singing right there in the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do a few takes and try to get the, one that's like where my voice isn't too bad, because I have no training in singing or anything like that. Yeah. But so that's why I created that YouTube channel, because it was kind of like, okay, I don't need to be Jordan Peterson. I don't need to be this, and this.
No.
I just want people to experience the peace that comes with knowing that Christ is with you. And so if my channel can do that for some people, awesome.
That's great. Well, what I will do is I will send this to you, and then you can, show it to whoever you want and say, okay, you can show it, or no, I'd rather not see it. So either way, but if you do, then I'll include the link to your YouTube channel if you want me to. And I just appreciate your story, and
thank you.
And I very much understand. I mean, my whole channel is, in a lot of ways, I mean, these conversations are obviously what they are, but my monologues are just thinking out loud and sharing it with people. And it's a really kind of a crazy thing, but kind of a cool thing. And then to have people respond to it and leave comments. And of course, one thing led to another. And so we have the Discord community, and, because as a pastor of a church, you can't be everyone's best friend. You just can't do that in even the size of a small church, and you can't do that in a Discord. But just to get a chance to, because your story blesses me, and it's, I don't know, it's just really cool. And it's a great story. It's a great story, and it's not done. And there'll be more, as you well know, there'll be more, be more hard things. And, just my sense of you is that you're a struggler. But the struggling yields its own fruit, and it's yielding the fruit of song, and it's yielding the fruit of thought. And I love your observation that, the deeper I go, the less satisfying it is. The further I go, the colder and colder it gets. That's a really interesting way of saying it. And so that sort of brings you have to do that. I think about that in terms of when you talked about the tragic death of your sister and brother-in-law and the funeral, and people, and that's a common thing. People just have to say stuff that tries to make sense of it. And one of the things that I learned as a pastor is, don't try to edit that. Just let them talk, because they're sort of pronouncing things on the world, but the world can take it. And they're in trauma right now. They're in pain. They're trying to make sense of such a horrendous thing. And and I love your the little snippets of your father's story too, and of your parents. Life is hard. Life in this world is hard. And I love how you're okay, we're gonna do criminology, and hey, here I can do college. I like college. I'm good at college, and I'm gonna go through and be a PhD. I'm gonna live in college. Like, nope, that's not what's gonna happen. You work dead-end jobs. You're working 2 full-time jobs. I mean, it's a great story. It's a great story. And there'll be more, and it'll be in some ways like what you've had already, but there'll be new things and different things. So it's a cool and wonderful thing. So thanks for sharing
Thank
it.
you. Well, and your channel and everything you've been saying has been a blessing to me too. So I appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. So I'm going to send this to you, and you can show it to your wife, show it to your mom, whoever you want to see it before you
Yeah.
give me the green light. And if you decide to give me the green light, and again, part of what I really like about the Discord is, whereas the open internet is sort of like the open sea, and with these rando slots, I mean, anybody can sign up. It doesn't, I ask that people take no more than 2. And if they want more time or something, send me another email, and maybe we can, I get way more requests than I have time to fulfill, obviously. And so that's sort of my burden, to figure out when to say yes and when to say no. And I don't do that very well often, but I like the Discord server in that it is sort of an estuary where, we've had some interactions, and you've been in the Friday question and answer. And now, in terms of this little community, I know others from the community will watch this conversation because they've seen your name, and it's like, okay, I've been chatting with Chris Golden, and I've been chatting with him, and now, I know his story. So now when I talk to him, I'm going to think about his father and his story, and the story of criminology and the in-laws and the church. And I love your story at the Luis Palau crusade. And and what I love about this is, as a pastor, I am not these stories, everyone is unique, but a story like that isn't necessarily uncommon. People experience, miraculous things, and someone might be able to try and explain it one way or another. Okay, fine. That's totally, psychology is real. We get that. But that's a pretty doggone amazing thing, that your night terrors, a lot of this anger, right there, this stuff is lifted from you. And it doesn't mean, it just is, just like we say, you can just leave it right there and poke around it and explore it and all that. But again, I love your other saying, that the further you go in, the colder and colder it gets. That's such a, I love how you put that in. So anyway, so I'm just saying all this to say, I appreciate your story, and I hope we can share it, and I hope it can help you. It can help the community, because others will listen to your story, and you will have said something, and it'll touch them, and maybe they'll send you a message on the Discord server and say, tell me more about that. Or maybe they'll have a similar thing that you just expressed, you were able to work through, and they'll be able to say, I'm dealing with this, and it sounds sort of like what you dealt with. Can you tell me more about that? Maybe that'll help me. I mean, that's the way community works, and it's the way the church is supposed to work. So it's really cool.
Yeah. Hey, sounds good.
All right, Chris. Well, I sure appreciate this, and I'll send you a message with the link to this. I've got to upload it and render it and all that stuff, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Paul.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.